There's a particular emotion that shows up for every couple that I work with, and Brené Brown made it very popular when she first had her TED Talk. The emotion is shame. And I wanted to bring on an expert to help us better understand this topic, especially in the context of relationship. Shame is there every week when I work with couples. It's driving people to respond and react in certain ways. It's leading them to hide parts of themselves, to be afraid to show their true self. And it's an emotion that I think if we start to better understand and to learn how to face, we can truly improve and strengthen our relationship. So today I've brought on Kyira Wackett. She's a therapist, speaker, artist, and founder of Adversity Rising. And it is her passion to lead the anti-Band-Aid movement in mental health. She empowers individuals and organizations to break free from fear, shame, and quick fix thinking, teaching the art of radical acceptance and values-driven living. With a signature blend of depth, honesty, and strategy, Kyira helps people confront the hard truths, holding them back, and design lives rooted in authenticity, resilience, and self-trust. I love speaking with Kyira. Every time we talk, I just feel like my eyes are open to so many different levels of what we go through in our normal human existence. So I'm confident you're going to walk away from today's talk with a lot of clarity and some good things to start talking about with your partner. So go grab a warm drink and let's dive in. Welcome to Relationship Reset, a podcast for high-achieving couples who've been together for over a decade and don't want to feel like roommates anymore. I'm Katie Russler, relationship strategist and couples counselor with almost 20 years of experience helping ambitious couples reconnect, strengthen communication, and turn their relationship into the best part of their success story. This podcast is about using practical tools and a lot of real talk to help you understand your patterns, stop feeling stuck and discouraged, and start working on your relationship in ways that actually fit your busy life. Because your relationship shouldn't be the cost of your success, it should be the best part of it. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the podcast. You know, it's so interesting when we start to unpack long-term relationships. There is a theme that shows up in every relationship I've worked with. The person I'm interviewing today would probably say the same: shame. That word resonates with so many of us down to the core of us. Sadly, because of the homes we grew up in, the relationships we saw growing up, and here we are now in a long-term relationship still feeling it. So I brought Kyira Wackett, and we're going to be unpacking in our therapist ways the concept of shame and better understanding how do we start to break out of this prison that's been kind of created for us. And what do we do to start building connection deeper in our relationships that feels more vulnerable but safe? So Kyira, thank you so much for being here today. It was such a pleasure to be on your podcast. I'm happy to have you now on mine.
I know. I feel like when we first met, there was that instant, oh, we will have no problem having a conversation feeling. And so I'm excited that we get to explore in all these different avenues together and just see where we get in our own learning, our own work, and how we can support anyone else that's listening and seems to relate or resonate with the stuff that we're talking about.
Definitely. Let's start off with share a little bit with us about how you got into the realm of the counseling world.
Yeah.
As well as talking about the topic of shame.
You know, I think a lot of people that get into any sort of helping profession have, in one way, shape, or form, been a recipient of or participant of whatever that is. And I grew up with a significant amount of childhood trauma. I had a single mom who struggled with pretty severe drug addiction. She was in and out of jail, prison, treatment centers. And in line with this, her own mental health issues that would come up as well. So she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Over time, that's kind of evolved to more of a complex PTSD. For any listener that has gone through this themselves or with other people, it's always an interesting journey to see how diagnoses can change as we learn more information. And so the way I like to think about it is that my mom has had a lot of pain, and that pain is not something that she learned how to move through in a healthy and adaptive way. And that resulted in a lot of behaviors that affected her and affected me. And so growing up, I moved in and out of different families' homes. I was in therapy and I thought it was dumb as a kid. And not because I didn't like the conversation, but because I felt talked at and almost like what was happening was reduced to, well, here's what you're experiencing. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's how you move on. And it felt very reductive. As I got older, I started to struggle with what now I can put language to was much more of a complex PTSD set of experiences that really for me manifested as anxiety for the most part. I definitely had some trauma triggers. I would have panic attacks, but the majority of how I function in the world was really through this lens of anxiety and hypervigilance. And as I got into high school and college, I was still seeking out therapy and support, but it was more of my own volition. So I had some hope that maybe as I got older, as I put more language to things, I might get some help. And I eventually developed an eating disorder coming into college. And it was a very roundabout development. I didn't set into anything. I think many people can relate to that negative body image piece. It doesn't always result in these really extreme behaviors, but I think body image was just one facet of things I felt like shit about in my life. And then as my diet changed when I went to college and my body dropped a lot of weight, that triggered in me another thing of, oh, well, now I have to maintain this because people are looking at me as though now I'm a model for how to eat, how to look, how to behave, how to show restraint. And that played really well into my anxiety and my perfectionism. And so continuing down the therapy line, I just continued to feel like, well, this is like a very underwhelming experience. I remember a therapist one time telling me that she thought my eating disorder developed because I had had oral surgery when I was maybe 8. And that I probably developed some fixation with my mouth. And I was like, should we also talk about the fact that my mom, I found her in drug homes, she's in prison, and I've had a significant other set of losses and trauma. That could, wait, okay, but maybe it's the surgery. There were these moments where I was like, I just don't feel like I'm getting what I need and I don't feel like I'm seen. And so as I kind of journeyed through my own, who am I, what do I want to do in the world, I started to think about how I could maybe be someone different in this field, and not like an ego, I'm better, but more I'd be willing to put the work in to have somebody else's experience feel different than what mine was. And so therapy was really a way of going, well, I actually really like to talk to people. I have a hard time not taking responsibility for other people's stuff. And there's a lot of ways I need to learn how to not do that. But maybe if I do it professionally, I can learn how to do it and have healthy boundaries. And I'll be responsible for these people's spaces. And I can learn how to have boundaries for myself. And so it was a big evolution. I ended up starting in the trauma and eating disorder realm. I think a lot of that, again, was just that's where I saw the system broken in a way that it affected me. So I wanted to have instant change and learn if I could do something different. Had I had enough healing that I could change the conversation? And honestly, from the moment that I started my training, I was like, man, I feel like I'm having the same conversations over and over again, and none of the stories were the same. So I was like, what's happening here? And then I took a training on basically interpersonal defense mechanisms. Brené Brown did it, but it was before she really had gotten big on her TED Talk and all these pieces, but she was expanding on interpersonal theory. And she talked about these 3 defense mechanisms. And that was really when I heard the term shame come into what was already an established theory. And when she talked about these ways that people respond when they feel shame, I was like, holy shit, that's the light bulb. That's it.
Yeah.
That is what I'm seeing in the trauma centers, in eating disorder treatment, all the way up into high levels of hospitalization. We are seeing people that are living in a constant defense state against shame and this guttural fear of not being worthy of love, connection, and belonging. And that's really where the healing has to happen. And from that moment, I definitely still saw people with eating disorders, trauma. I was in that specialty, but really what I was doing was building shame insight and shame resilience as we were moving forward in the healing process.
Thank you for sharing with us the journey you had to go on to finally understand what this feeling was, what this belief system was. And I laugh internally at the, horrible psychotherapist totally Freudian going it's oral fixation. What?
Oh, I know.
However, many of us have had poor experience in a therapist. As a therapist, I think, oh gosh, glad that we've progressed in the field. Glad we've progressed in the field. Now, let's start to talk about shame in the context of long-term relationships, especially for high achievers. We come into every relationship that we're in kind of with a bunch of, I always say a bunch of suitcases. And you want to get on the airplane and they're like, you got to check your bags. But you're like, this is my identity. This is who I am. I cannot let go of these suitcases. So let's unpack the shame suitcase. and
Mhm.
how it can play out 10, 15, 20 years later in a relationship who thought, well, we already know all these things about each other. We've already been vulnerable. And
Yeah,
really, they haven't.
absolutely. I think one of the things that is really important for us to understand, using your suitcase metaphor, oftentimes we think about the bags that we're carrying as a choice. We've packed them, we know what's in them, we're aware that we're carrying them. When we're talking about a shame suitcase, we're talking about like a frog in boiling water, a
Mhm.
suitcase that was given to us that at first was maybe the weight of a piece of paper or a Post-it note. And over time, it's gotten increasingly heavier and denser, and it's hurting our back to carry. And we don't want to carry. We don't even realize how much of an effect it's having. But when we look down, we don't even see it. It's still just this normal, it's almost like an appendage that we have. And so if we go back to what shame is at its core, shame is a specific subset of fear. It is the fear of not being loved, having connection, or belonging. And as human beings, we require that. We require connection and belonging to not just thrive, but survive. And as you're born, when we're really, really, really little, our entire sense of self is developed based on the world around us. And so when we need to get those basic needs met, food, water, shelter, and belonging, our brain is going, how do I get that? How do I get that? How do I get that? And it starts to witness this world where, unfortunately, a lot of things are conditional. This person is treated better than this person. When I act this way, I'm treated better or worse by my caregiver. On this day, this caregiver gave me this love and attention. And the rules for most of us aren't consistent. So let's use an example. Someone that grew up with a parent with their own severe mental health issue, or let's say a drug or alcohol dependence. Maybe one day you got home from school and they were so happy to see you and they cuddled with you and played with you. The next day they're yelling at you and you don't even know why. And so as kids, whatever inputs we had around what it looked like to be loved and to belong have become the foundation of that suitcase. And whenever we look for any intimate relationships, we're going to take all of the data that we have from those early relationships to formulate how we move forward. So it's caregivers, but it's also early peer relationships, other adult figures, as we maybe get into middle school and high school, maybe early relationships that we're having with boyfriends, girlfriends, starting to think about, okay, well, what do I need to be and how do I have to show up in the world to be loved? And so when we come into these long-term relationships, we had those suitcases. We may have been somewhat aware, depending on the work we had done up to that point. But what we're really talking about is the list that we've curated around how I have to exist in the world to get this basic need met that I absolutely, no matter what, need to make sure I have if I'm going to survive.
I'm just in my mind playing with this metaphor because you're talking about like things sticking to it and adding to it. And I'm thinking it's like a metal suitcase that's like all these magnets
Oh, yeah.
attaching to. Because I think
Yes.
the longer we're in a relationship with our partner, gradually how we start to speak to each other, how we start to treat each other, right? Or how we pull away, all of these things add more magnets to that suitcase of shame. I'm not enough. I'm not lovable. She, he, they will never care about me. These pieces. And I think this is a big reason why couples stop being vulnerable with each other. One, it hurts. There is a place that we all get to if we're not doing the work regularly, where when we start to open up, our partner stays in performance mode and is like, let me fix this. I'm so tired of hearing you talk about this, whatever it might be. And then we're like, well, I can't share vulnerably because you're going to shame me for it, basically, right? You're going to put me down. Like, what's wrong with you? Why would you ever think that way? That type of language, right? And then we start to go, okay, I can't talk to my partner that way. I can't be open. I can't be authentically myself. I can't. I can't. And it then creates that heavier suitcase even more so, because the perfect place for us to heal and do this work is in relationship. How else are we going to get triggered, feel it, to go, there it is? When we're alone with our thoughts, it can show up. But in the context of relationship, I think we get a lot of that. Oh, there's that magnet. What is that one about? Oh, there's that piece of lead or wood, wood or whatever in that suitcase. What is that about? So it's this double-edged sword of it's going to cause pain, but it's also the only way to heal. And we have to do it in the context of partnership. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think many of us even realize that what we're doing and the behaviors that we exhibit in our relationship are because we feel like we have to stay in them. I'm thinking about even as somebody who my shame was basically all around, if I am not constantly doing for other people, why would they stay? Why would they choose me? If we go back to early attachment and abandonment wounds, thinking about my mom left. I then lived with other family members. They left. I was constantly in a position where the people that were supposed to be there weren't. So the subconscious message is, so why would anybody else stay? Well, the way that you make sure people stay is you make sure that you're needed. So even when we think about me going, well, gosh, I'm always the secret keeper. I'm the one that people turn to. That wasn't because I liked it. I do, but that wasn't the guiding force. The guiding force was I need to do that. And so for many people, when they start their relationships, sure, maybe you're burnt out 15 years in, but when you came into the relationship, you felt like you had to be the one that constantly got it all together. You always dressed a certain way. You were always trying to perform to be needed or chosen in some way, shape, or form. And it's this idea that there is this sort of ladder that we need to climb, this social hierarchy of needing to be good enough. And we've had that. Every one of us has had that thought in some way, shape, or form. If I gain weight, they're going to love somebody else or not find me attractive. If I'm not making this much money, what are they going to think about me? If I don't want another kid, they're going to leave. It's these moments when authenticity meets the shame story and we don't know what to do with it, so we stuff it. Because what we're looking for, again, is guaranteed acceptance and belonging. Most of us didn't grow up understanding unconditional love to begin with, so we don't even know that that's an option. So when we're thinking about this idea of, well, we need to grow, we need to heal, we need to undo these things in the context of relationship, we don't even know there's something to undo because we don't even recognize what it would feel like to have unconditional love and belonging. And so I think what comes up for many people isn't, well, here's these magnets, I have shame. They look at them, but it's almost like all the wording on them is in another language that they've never seen before. They can't decipher what they are. So they just assume, well, this is more shit I have to fix. The problem is probably me. I've got to figure out my diet. I've got to figure out my energy. I've got to get more interested in sex. I've got to be more okay with spontaneity. I've got to make more money. I've got to figure out how to be more productive. Let me buy the 17th planner of the year because that's going to be the fix. We internalize it as an us problem. So we don't even recognize there's an interpersonal dynamic that could support it. And the same exists for a partner. Oftentimes, the relationships that we're in, particularly if we start them before we've at least developed enough insight to be aware of the bag, we've found somebody whose shame story perfectly enmeshes with ours. So we're all just contributing to the same shit. In the case of, let's think about a relationship where one person's shame is, I was raised and socialized male in the US. It's a patriarchal society. Men are supposed to be the breadwinners. Men are supposed to provide. All of their shame is about being man enough, manning up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That's the story they grew up in. Then they're married to, let's say, a heterosexual relationship. They're married to a cisgender woman who was raised to believe, well, I'm supposed to be able to handle it all and be fiercely independent, but also I need to be nurtured and loved because I've been hearing all this feminine energy piece, since I'm supposed to be taken care of, but also be independent. And so I've got to handle all of these things and make sure that they need and want for nothing, and I can handle every single thing on the plate. Well, those stories are going to play really well until they don't, until one or both of them go, I am exhausted, burnt out, resentful, and lonely, because no person can sustainably live an entire life living that way in performance. But they didn't burn out when they were 5. They burnt out when they were 35 or 55. And now their body is saying enough, and they've got to figure out what to do differently. But the story in their head is the problem is still likely me, and I should fix it.
You are totally right. And I love that you brought up the word resent. I was just thinking as you were speaking, I was like, gosh, and this is where resentment builds, where we think it's us, but then we start to go, but it's not me. And then we resent our partner. And half the time it's communication that never happened. It was words that were never spoken. It was a sense of my partner gets the permission to sit on the couch and do nothing while I'm the one. And it's like, but you just said it. But if performance is love for you, if performance is acceptance, if the doing makes you feel like I am needed, then it has nothing to do with your partner sitting on the couch. Yes, you wish you could do that in the sense that I wish I could give myself that permission. But is your partner then to blame?
Right. And
That's
recognizing how often did your shame say, I can't take a break.
Yeah.
I can't sit on the couch. So you are resentful that they're sitting down, but it's not ultimately because you want them to get up and do the work. It's that you can't do the thing that they're doing because the stakes are too high. And that's really where it does come out as an attack. Well, why don't you ever take care of anything? Why don't you put the groceries away? It's why do you have to put the groceries away? And why is it on you that you can't take a day off? And so you're so upset about this person who's sitting and enjoying the football game or whatever the case is. The resentment is usually about the permission you can't give yourself. Because if you were to give yourself that permission, subsequently the dominoes would fall. Well, then what would it look like to still accomplish the things that need to get done? Well, that would spark other conversation with my partner. Maybe we need to talk about equitable distribution of some of these things. Maybe the conditioning looks different. And so it does start with this internal piece. And often what I'll tell people is what you'll notice when shame is coming into the picture is when they make that statement of, well, I can't just sit down. I have to be the one that puts everything away. They just accept that as period. I have to do it or no one else will, period. Instead of, if I don't do it, here's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
And the way that they just accept, well, I have to do it or everything is going to be whatever, they're not even questioning what a reality could look like where they didn't do it because shame won't even let them turn the corner. It's like they watched the first 5 minutes of the scary movie. They decided how it's going to end and they're not even willing to look and see if something could look different than the decision they've already made.
Yeah. Like that scary movie actually is a rom-com. It just had a really weird intro.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, we'll change. I promise. Oh my goodness. Yes. Let's start to discuss then, how does a couple start to approach shame and vulnerability? Thank you, Brene Brown. Shame and vulnerability together, even if it's been years since they've been able to have those types of conversations. Like if you had a couple talking with you today and were like, how do we even start this? What would be the tools you would give them?
One of the things that often needs to happen first is some individual work and some willingness to understand because really when you come into the room with a couple, there's 3 clients that you're treating. There's the individual people, and we'll just assume this is a 2-person partnership. There's individual people, and then there's the collective relationship. And so when you come in, people will often get to a point where they're like, everything's terrible. I'm fighting with my partner all the time. Help, we need couples therapy. But they're not doing the individual work. The insight around what's theirs individually isn't going to get generated in the therapy room as a couple. And so I think the first step for many people is 1, to recognize you have shame because you're a human. It's a universal experience. You have it. 2, to start to recognize what some of the rules are that you have. And we can go specific. What are the rules you have in your relationship? But we could go broader if that feels more accessible. Who is the you feel like you have to be in order to be accepted, loved, belonged? And I think about this in the context of, let's say, social media. You and I are both business owners. What does that look like if you're not getting a certain number of likes? What does it look like if you're not posting enough? Does that change your worth and value? What does it look like if you aren't earning enough money? Does that change your worth and value? What are all the bullet point lists of expectations that you have? Well, now let's bring that into the relationship. And oftentimes the conversation that I'll have with people is that typically the way we're showing up in our relationship comes from 2 different facets. It's the standards that we have for ourselves and the expectations that we have of other people. And so those expectations often are either, well, I don't expect that anyone's going to do anything for me. I don't expect that anyone's going to show up for me. I expect that people will leave. I expect they'll find somebody better. I'm just waiting until that day. And then over time, if that's paired with standards of, I have to be the best in the room to be chosen, not because I think I'm the best, but because no one would pick me unless they saw me as the person that could handle it all, do it all, had the right body, the right income, the right whatever it is. Those things come hand in hand and they become the story that you enter the relationship with. And then over time, you burn out. And then what happens is they swing. The resentment then swings the expectations, but it never changes the standards. Suddenly, well, they should know better. If they really loved me, they would care. But you still don't even believe you're worth asking for what you need. So now your expectations just swing from one end to the other, but your standards are still, I deserve to be treated as though I'm not worthy, loved, and I have belonging unless I still meet all of these qualifications. And so we need to get to that. And then we can sit down and be like, can we all make sense as to how we got here? Let's build some compassion. Boy, do these things go hand in hand for two brains and bodies that are just trying to feel chosen.
Yeah.
Now, what does that look like if we want to separate being chosen from meeting these conditions that you don't want and were never yours to begin with?
Yeah.
And how do you go from feeling like you need to be needed to wanted? How do you go from feeling like you have to make your partner feel needed to wanted? And then we can start to shift the conversation. And that is going to require vulnerability. That is going to require risk. And so the other piece of it is we have to start to establish a sense of self that is not dependent on another person. Mm-hmm. So the only way that we're going to not let shame enter into the room is that the locus of control and psychological safety is inside of us. So if everything goes to shit the way that your brain has said it would you still believe you'll be okay? And if you can't get to that place that you believe, you might not like it, you might not want it, but you would be okay, then you don't have the shame resilience internally to help you and your partner weather the storm sustainably. Instead, you're just going to do a little bit and you're going to fall right back into those patterns because you're still interdependent on each other for psychological safety.
Absolutely. And I was picturing, I'm such an analogy person, but Velcro. And it's like this toxic Velcro. And often I hear people say, well, if my partner won't do the work, does it matter for me to do the work? And yes, because as soon as you do the work, you become a different strip of Velcro that doesn't adhere. And then they have to change to be able to find what's that healthy connection. Yes. What is that healthy coming together piece? And if they choose not to, then like you said, if shit hits the fan, I'm still okay.
Yeah.
The wording I use for this is, are you being the best version of yourself and the ideal version of the relationship you want to have? Like, are you being that higher version of you? If that's not showing up every day, then that's the work you've got to do. You can't point the finger at your partner.
Yeah.
They're going to be who they're going to be. But if you go, for myself, if this doesn't work, if I have to walk away or they walk away, I will know that I really was the highest version of me that I can be.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what you just said, is like the safety, that locus of control, it's within me. And it's okay, whatever comes. Mm-hmm. It's okay if they don't change their side of the Velcro. Just to go, now we have a healthy connection. I love how we word it differently, but I love how you word it. I think it makes it much more clear to us and much more approachable in this work that we better understand that the individual work helps in the context of the relationship, but it is essential. When I work with a couple, one of our first sessions is an imago-based session where I go, let's look at your patterns and your response cycle based off of what you learned. It has nothing to do with your partner, but let me show you how your partner pulls it back up in you. And they're always like, whoa. And the other partner's like usually eyes open going like, oh my gosh, you barely know my partner and you've just nailed exactly how they respond to me, how they act in certain things. And I go, you know what? It's not for your partner to fix this. It's for you to fix. So when you start to respond this way, what needs are not being met? How are you not meeting those needs? And so we get into that work. I like to do it in the context of the couple because they both need to hear that they both have work to do. You know, that helps remove that like shame of it's just me. I'm always the problem. No, we both, everyone has work to do. And then we do that individual work. There's something to be said about having someone, a professional, unpack your suitcase to just a small amount together with your partner and then have theirs unpack just a little bit to go, okay, I see now. I've been pointing the finger at my partner. And in reality, this was always my needs, my issues, my need for perfection, my need to receive love and acceptance in a certain way. They were never going to be able to do it in that way because of my own needs. And you kind of called it out, cognitive dissonance, right? We're going to look for it to not work out because it's what we know. It's the belief system we have.
Yeah. And I think when you're describing those conversations with a couple in the beginning, there's an important piece to it too around helping people differentiate between empathy and absolution and recognizing that oftentimes what they've been doing when they're stuck in their own shame cycle is rather than trying to understand someone else's shame story. They're explaining it away in a sense to try to make it so then they just need to be okay with it. And I see this happen, whether it's in romantic relationships, it could be adult children with their aging parent, where it's like, well, look at all the trauma that they had. So this makes sense. I'm like, cool, it does make sense. Absolutely glad you generated that insight to see beyond you as the central focus of their story. It doesn't absolve them from the impact they've had on you. And one of the things that I think, particularly when we're looking at high functioning people pleasers, and this could be any gender identity, I tend to see it more in people socialized female. Just based on, I think, cultural norms, particularly most of the people I see in the US, that people pleaser, that caretaker role that comes into play. Often what's happening is any explanation or awareness, particularly of their partner, if they're in a heterosexual relationship, oftentimes there hasn't been a lot of conversation. That partner has been quote unquote stoic, but really what they're doing is they're just reactive. They don't talk about the things that are really going on, but then the conflict resides in their anger or outbursts or their avoidance or detachment from something else. And then a big part of the conversation is, as we're making sense of this, you're going to now start to say, well, as I can appreciate this better, as I can understand this better, now I have to be more attuned to them and be more okay, because look at all their pain, look at all this stuff that they're doing. So a lot of the conversation I feel like has to happen also is we are going to acknowledge that both of you have co-created this dynamic, and there is a burden of responsibility on both of you if you are moving forward together, and not in a way to shame them, but to say that this is a shared load of responsibility, because that's something I do witness in the room is you'll suddenly watch the other person go, oh gosh, well, look at all this that they've struggled with. Yeah, now they're opening up and they're doing all this work. And then they start to create a false sense of hope because this looks like vulnerability. And it is. It's just not the level of vulnerability required to necessitate change in their relationship dynamic. It requires the vulnerability on the other person's side to say, and now I can see it and not fix it. And that is the vulnerability risk on the other side that I feel like oftentimes you can do it in the room with both people in the room, and sometimes takes that individual work for them to come back and to be able to hold that space where they don't immediately make it an empathy-driven response that's really just absolution and responsibility taking that's going to keep them in the same pattern. It's just going to look different.
Yeah. Let's bring up one of the biggest nuggets of shame that I've noticed. I'm sure you're seeing this too, around emotional intelligence in relationships and how we are faced. And I'm thinking specifically men, mid-late 30s through their 50s, who now are expected to be more equal, to be more fair, to be able to speak their feelings, to do all these things, but we're never given the map and how to do that. And we as a society and multiple cultures, especially in the Western world, shame them for not having it figured out yet. You know, we're both female, so we have our own perspectives, but I think you and I definitely in the type of work and how you and I work are able to see it's the perfect storm of shame for men and also women who are much more thought-oriented and not so much feeling-oriented, but I see it more with men over here in Europe heavily, in certain countries as well, that it is, in a sense, set up for failure. That is such the weight on the back, like you were talking about.
Yeah. And the added layer of, again, I think there's value to most of the cultural shifts we're trying to make around redefining gender norms, about kind of disrupting the patriarchy and positions of power. Like anything, though, it's not an all or nothing. And so the other thing I think about is not only are we now saying, okay, make these shifts, have these skills, but also we as a culture are not going to give you any empathy because as a male, particularly if we think about an able-bodied male, a white male, a heterosexual male, you don't have anything to complain about or be upset about. So actually you should be fine. But also you should be able to talk about your feelings and not be reactive. But your feelings aren't actually valid because you don't know what suffering really is, because let me tell you about everybody else's suffering. And so I think there is this other piece of it that, do I think that the patriarchy is a real thing? Yes. Do I think that there are many able-bodied white men with significant socioeconomic status that have way too much power? Absolutely. That's not the person that's walking into the room, though, with their partner, looking to figure out how to have a different conversation and to be a part of the change. And so we have to figure out a way to have a both and. Yes, hold people accountable, understand privilege. Let's also just recognize that there are disadvantages to being in those different identities as well that have made some of these things harder. And how can you, going back to that empathy versus absolution, we're not saying, so excuse them.
Right.
What we're saying is, can you have a little bit of empathy as to why this might look different? And then if you are that person in partnership with somebody, then the question becomes, so what's the line of tolerance that feels reasonable and fair and still supports the psychological safety that I need to be able to have to move forward in that relationship? And once you get clear on that, it's less, well, I'm either absolving them, excusing it away, or I'm taking care of them. It's more, their stuff is hard. My stuff is hard. Our stories are very different. How do those stories both continue to grow and to heal in a way that we can either together or separately become the version of ourselves we're excited to be every day?
Yeah. And having a good conversation about, in a sense, weaponizing emotional competence. There's one partner who's more in that lane of emotional intelligence. You don't go, well, I'm not good at that, so you'll have to figure it out. Like, you take charge. Be very careful in your relationship. Honestly, that should fall in anything. Don't weaponize financial competence. Don't weaponize, like, we as partners need to be very aware where we throw all our eggs into a basket for one partner who has that skill set. Because for me, the greatest sign of respect I can have for my partner is not to weaponize his competence, but to start to learn as much as I can. Obviously, not to his level, maybe.
Yeah.
But enough to be like, I got you if something happens, right? Like, I can be there. That piece is very hard to unpack as a woman who goes, well, you know, I have so much else I have to take care of. Yeah, I can get into that mindset, right? And we all, I think as women, we can, not all, but many of us feel this generational scream within us at a certain point in our lives. You and I have had this discussion about perimenopause, comes out this rage, and it feels like it's not just our voice coming out of us at times. Why is it all on me? Why do I have to do everything? And yet we also are in the present relationship. And we need to have those types of discussions and not hold them to the generations of problems and the issues in our family. But in the context of how I've been showing up as the wife or female partner in this relationship has looked this way, and I don't like it anymore. And I'd like to change stuff. Let's have a conversation about that.
Yes.
And get curious about how it could change and understand it's going to be uncomfortable and not feel shame around bringing up those things. Same as a male partner who may have felt the responsibility financially like crazy and go, I don't want this responsibility on me. I don't enjoy this. I want to be at home with the kids. I'd like to, role reverse. Why can't we? Having these discussions more openly instead of falling into the path that we saw from the generations before us, I think is important. But there is so much shame wrapped up in that. And so I'm glad we I feel like we've scratched the surface on all of those things. But these are the types of conversations, dear listener, to have with your partner. What are your thoughts on? What do you think about? Why do you think this came to be a way that we act in our relationship or how we do things?
Yeah. And I will say one of the things that has really helped in my relationship, and I really empower couples to do this themselves, is as you go back, it's easy to get into the details of the day-to-day when you're overwhelmed. The issue that I'm having, or if I'm feeling that resentment, probably isn't about the dinner that I'm making tonight and feeling annoyed about the dinner that I'm making. It's all the stories that I have around what it means to make dinner, about all of the things I quote unquote have to do. There's all of this angst and this depth that's not just, well, I'm pissed off because I had to make dinner again. And so a lot of that has come down to a question and reflection for myself, and I do this with my husband, is, okay, well, what are the things that we're doing? What are the stories that we're telling ourselves? And what are the things that we want to choose to do versus we feel stuck doing? And what's super interesting, at least in our relationship, is actually a lot of the things on paper didn't change. It wasn't actually about a different change in the roles and the responsibility. Often what was needed was, I'm more verbal than he is. I understand that it is a very healthy position to be in to not need anybody to give me a gold star. Sometimes I still need a fucking gold star. And I recognize it. And I've told myself I should be fine without it. And it's silly and whatever it is. But you know what? What it actually is sometimes I think I bring in old stories that things are expected of me and not seen. And there are moments where it's harder for me to get myself out of that headspace on my own.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're feeling me start to pull away, what I actually need, instead of you feeling like you did something wrong, I need you to be able to step away a little bit to say, oh, this might actually not be about me. This is about her. This is something that she's afraid of right now. What does she need? Instead of how should I defend myself? And that being able to flip that. And now what we do is we have a list of all of our different roles, individual and shared roles, and then the responsibilities that go underneath it. And the list is exorbitantly long. And we tried to be as detailed as we could. When it comes to our daughter, it's as detailed as scheduling a dental appointment once a year, scheduling her doctor's appointment, refilling this prescription, like as granular as we could. And then we just highlighted in different colors what typically falls to me and what falls to him. And then what stuff was shared, kind of mishmashed. And we looked at that and then we said, are we good with that? And disproportionately, if we look at the number of tasks, I have more than he does. But what we said is it was less about the tasks and more about the emotional load. Yeah. Where is the emotional load shifting and what choices are we making there? I actually really love, like it's January when we're recording this. If anybody else is in the summer camp sphere, you have to sign your kids up for summer camp, at least in the US, in freaking January.
Yep.
And so I am planning our entire summer right now. I am overwhelmed by that. I am resentful that I need to do that. I'm not resentful of the fact that Jordan's not doing it. I just think it's ridiculous that we need to plan everything this far in advance. And I'm still actively going to choose to be a part of the system because I want my kid to be able to go to some of these camps she's excited about. And I'm still going to be the one to do it because I'm also a little bit better at organizing. I have a skill that it's not that he doesn't have it, he doesn't enjoy cultivating it. I do. Mm-hmm. I love watching my Jenga go into play as I move things around to see just how well I can make it work. That brings me joy. I might be stressed. It's also a choice. And I think those reframes, and at least for us, the shift from needing to wanting, being expected versus choosing, that language was what started to shift it for us. And so there are times I still feel like I'm doing all these things and you're just not around, or I'm annoyed because you're watching the Packer game and I feel frustrated. And then I'm able to step back and go, am I actually upset at him for taking a break? Do I really believe in my heart of hearts he does not deserve to sit down right now and he has to earn that? Because if that's the case, then I need to go back and think about how I'm perpetuating conditional love. But what I really notice is, no, it's that I'm having a really hard time giving myself permission in this season to take the breaks that I want. So what does that look like to give myself radical self-love instead of waiting to feel like I need to earn it? And then everything feels like it's a different type of hard, but a hard that I'm excited about taking on, not a hard that just feels stuck and perpetual the way that I think shame, and going back to our initial starting, those bags feel. Because they're always going to be that. There's no way to change those. But when we leave them and allow space for the other parts, that's the shift.
Definitely. And you're speaking about the separation of love and logistics, not enmeshing them and removing the shame play in that. So I love that you ended with that. Kyira, if people want to connect with you after hearing this, how can they find you?
Well, I would say probably the easiest place to go is my website, adversityrising.com. You can find links there to find me on social, to connect to my YouTube page, to go to my podcast and listen to episodes, including our episode, which just came out and is incredible. I loved our conversation. It's also a great place where you can just click that connect link and reach out if you're like, hey, I have a question. I don't know where to go. What's helpful? That's, I think, just the best stop shop. So reach out, ask those questions, share what you need. I'd love to be a part of that support system for you.
Definitely. I will have the link to your website as well as our episode in the show notes. So dear listener, go click on that and listen to our episode around Kyira's podcast next after this one. I always love our conversations, Kyira. I think we could just have our own podcast. I think I'm just therapist talk, real talk about life and all the things.
I agree.
I have appreciated this and the tools that you've given the listeners, very practical. You know, being able to say, okay, some of it's going to be my own individual work. Some of it's just taking ownership. And then some of it's stuff we've got to do together. And it's way better for us to talk about it than to keep hiding from each other and keeping that shame cycle going.
Absolutely.
Dear listener, we will see you next week. Before you go, I want to leave you with this. The effort you put into your relationship is one of the most important investments you'll ever make. How you communicate and grow together shapes your home, your leadership, and the example you set for the people around you. Relationship work is truly legacy work, and it quietly impacts more lives than we often realize. If this episode resonated, consider sharing it with someone you care about, a partner, a friend, or another couple who's building a full life and want their relationship to be the best part of it too. And if you're enjoying these conversations, make sure to follow or subscribe to Relationship Reset. Leaving a rating or review also helps this message reach more couples who are ready to grow with intention. I'll see you next week.